Grace quietly served dinner as the family ate together. Steam rose from the bowls of japchae and grilled fish, the smell of sesame oil filling the dining room of the Park family's Manhattan townhouse. Her mother-in-law suddenly slammed her chopsticks onto the table. The sound cracked through the room like a slap. 5 years. The room fell silent. Even the children at the far end of the table stopped chewing. 5 years in this family, and you still haven't given my son a child. Grace lowered her eyes. She had heard those words so many times they barely surprised her anymore. But they still landed somewhere deep, somewhere she had stopped trying to protect. Her mother-in-law continued, her voice sharp as a blade dragged across stone. A marriage without children isn't a marriage. You're nothing but a disappointment. Grace slowly turned toward her husband, waiting, hoping, praying that he would say something. Anything. Park Jae-won sat at the head of the table, his chopsticks frozen halfway to his mouth. He said nothing. He simply lowered his head and continued eating, chewing slowly like the words hadn't touched him at all. His silence hurt far more than his mother's insults ever could. Grace excused herself to the kitchen, where she stood at the sink for a long moment, gripping the edge of the counter, breathing through the ache in her chest. She did not cry. She had trained herself not to. Crying required someone to comfort her afterward, and there was no one left in that house who would. Welcome to Afro-Seoul Stories, Soulmates. Please like, share, and subscribe. It had always been Grace's fault. At least, that was what everyone believed. For 5 years, she carried the blame like a stone tied around her neck. She prayed every night. She visited doctor after doctor, sitting in cold waiting rooms filled with hopeful couples, filling out forms that asked the same invasive questions over and over. She tried every treatment her insurance would cover, and some it wouldn't. She tracked her ovulation with an app that buzzed her phone every morning like a countdown to failure. She cried after every negative pregnancy test, alone in the bathroom with the door locked, the faucet running so no one would hear. Her mother-in-law never let a gathering pass without a comment. My friend Mrs. Cho became a grandmother again last month, she said one Sunday, not looking up from her tea. Her daughter-in-law is younger than you, and already on her second child. That's wonderful for her, Grace said quietly. Is it something in your family? Some women, they just cannot carry. It happens. She sipped her tea. You should ask your mother if this runs in your bloodline. My mother had 4 children, Grace said, her voice steady even as her hands tightened in her lap. There's nothing wrong with my bloodline. Then what is it, Grace? Because 5 years is a long time for nothing to be wrong. Grace looked at Jae-won. He studied his plate like it held the answer to a question no one had asked. She looked back at her mother-in-law and said nothing more, because there was nothing she could say that would end it. At another dinner, months later, her mother-in-law reached across the table and patted Grace's hand with false gentleness. We are not getting younger, you know. Jae-won is not getting younger. A man needs an heir before he is old enough to be mistaken for the grandfather. Jae-won said quietly, but he did not finish the sentence. He let it die there, half-spoken, and went back to his food. Grace excused herself before dessert that night. Weeks passed, then months. Park slowly changed, the way ice slowly changes to water, so gradual you don't notice until you're standing in a puddle wondering where the solid ground went. He started working late, later than his position really required. He stopped inviting Grace to company events. He stopped eating dinner with her most nights, grabbing something at the office instead. Some nights he slept in his study. Grace noticed everything. She always had. But she kept making excuses for him because she loved him. One evening, after another failed round of treatment, Grace sat across from him at the kitchen island, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. I think we should both get tested, she said gently. Not just me. Both of us. Jae-won's face changed instantly, closing like a door slammed shut. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's not just me, Jae-won. Maybe we should look at every possibility. Together. There's nothing wrong with me. His voice was sharp, defensive. My mother says the Park men have never had this problem. Never. Not my father, not my grandfather. That is not how fertility works, and you know that. I studied this for years. I said no. He stood up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. I don't want to talk about this anymore. Grace watched him walk away, and something inside her folded quietly in on itself. His mother had said something similar to him only weeks before, in private, over tea in her own kitchen. You are a Park, she told him. cupping his face in her hands the way she had when he was a boy. There has never been anything wrong with the men in this family. Whatever this is, it is not you. Do not let that woman make you doubt yourself. She meant it as comfort. She did not know she was building a wall inside her son that would take years and a great deal of pain to tear down. One afternoon, the doorbell rang. Grace smiled, wiping her hands on a dish towel, thinking Jaiwan had finally come home early for once. She opened the door with hope still warm in her chest. Instead, a lawyer in a gray suit stood on the front step, a leather folder tucked under his arm. Beside him stood a beautiful Korean woman, elegant in a fitted coat, one hand resting lightly on a small, unmistakable curve at her stomach. Grace's breath caught somewhere behind her ribs. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Park, my name is David On. I represent Mr. Park Jaiwan." Grace's eyes moved past him to the woman. The woman did not look away. "I'm sorry to do this at your home," the lawyer said, extending the leather folder toward her. "These are the divorce papers." Behind them, a car door closed, and Park Jaiwan walked slowly up the path. He did not look at Grace when he reached the door. He walked past her into the house he had shared with her for 5 years. He did not deny anything. The woman softened her expression into something almost gentle as she said, "I'm carrying his baby." Grace looked down at the woman's stomach, at the careful way her coat was cut to show just enough of the curve beneath it, and something in Grace's chest cracked wide open. She did not scream. She did not cry, not there, not in front of them. She simply reached out and took the folder from the lawyer's hands, her fingers steady even though her whole body was shaking on the inside. "Come in," she said quietly. "I'll need a pen." Inside, at the same kitchen island where she had once gently suggested they both get tested, Grace signed the papers without shouting, without begging. "I hope she makes you happy," she said. And she walked away with her dignity, because that was the only thing she had ever truly needed to keep. Grace moved into a bright apartment on the Upper West Side within the month, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the park. She was never homeless, never desperate. Whatever else the divorce had taken from her, it had not taken her ability to stand on her own 2 feet. But the first night in that apartment, surrounded by boxes she hadn't unpacked, Grace sat on the bare hardwood floor with her back against the wall and finally let herself feel it. Not the performance of strength she had worn for 5 years at every dinner table, but the real weight underneath it. She cried until her chest hurt, quiet, controlled sobs that she muffled against her own knees because even alone, some part of her still didn't want anyone to hear. She looked around at the empty rooms, at the moonlight falling across unopened boxes labeled in her own handwriting, and she thought about how strange it was to grieve a marriage that had already been hollow for years before it ended. She wasn't just mourning Jaiwan. She was mourning the version of herself who used to believe that if she just prayed harder, tried harder, stayed quiet enough, things would fix themselves. "You did nothing wrong," she said out loud to the empty apartment, testing the words, needing to hear them in her own voice instead of just thinking them. "You did nothing wrong." She did not fully believe it yet, but she said it anyway, every night for weeks, standing at her new window looking out over the park, until slowly, the words started to feel less like a lie she was telling herself and more like a truth she was finally allowed to own. She hung her own art on the walls, bought a couch nobody but her had to approve of, cooked meals for one, and did not apologize for the portion sizes. Small things, but each one felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she hadn't realized she'd handed over. She returned to Halden Fertility Research, the lab where she had once been on track to lead her own department before she gave it up for a marriage that had quietly consumed her. "We've been developing something," her old supervisor told her during her first week back, sliding a folder across the desk. "A new approach to unexplained infertility diagnostics. I want you leading part of it." 5 months later, the research team announced a major breakthrough. Grace became one of the public faces of the project, speaking with the calm, grounded authority of someone who understood not just the science, but the pain behind it. Meanwhile, across the city, Park Jaiwan believed, for the first time in years, that he had finally gotten his life right. He married Yoon Sora in a small, quiet ceremony 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, and his mother wept happy tears through the entire thing, gripping Sora's hand like she was gripping the future itself. When Sora's stomach began to show, his mother could hardly contain herself. She bought little shoes before there was even a nursery. She called every relative she had, every old friend from church, every neighbor who would stand still long enough to listen. "Have you met my daughter-in-law?" she would say, steering Sora by the arm into rooms full of people, showing her off like a prize finally claimed after a long and unfair drought. "She's carrying my grandchild. A boy, we think. The doctor says the heartbeat is strong." She took Sora to her hair salon, insisting the stylist give her the same treatment she gave herself. She took her to lunch with the other mothers from her social circle, women whose daughters-in-law had given them grandchildren years earlier, and for the first time in 5 years, she sat among them without feeling like the exception, without feeling like the woman whose family had somehow fallen short. "I knew it," she told Sora over tea one afternoon, patting her hand the same way she used to pat Grace's, though the gesture felt entirely different now, warm instead of pitying. "I knew all along there was nothing wrong with my son. Some women are simply not meant to carry. It happens. But you," she squeezed Sora's hand, "you are giving this family what it has been missing." Jiwon, for his part, felt lighter than he had in years. He came home early now. He held Sora's hand in public without a second thought. He picked out paint colors for a nursery he had never let himself imagine with Grace, not because he hadn't wanted a child with her, but because somewhere along the way he had stopped letting himself hope at all. With Sora, hope came easily again, effortless, like something that had simply been waiting for the right woman to unlock it. "I feel like myself again," he told his mother one evening, watching Sora across the room laughing with one of her friends. "Like I finally did something right." His mother smiled and squeezed his shoulder. "You did, Jiwon. You finally did." Neither of them knew yet how far that belief was about to fall. Yoon and Sora kept delaying their hospital visits. A work conflict, a migraine, a scheduling error. "We should go this week," he said one evening. "The doctor wants to check on the baby's growth." "I already went," Sora said, not looking up from her phone. "Everything's fine. You don't need to worry. I want to be there next time." "Sure. Next time." Weeks later, Jiwon left his office early to surprise her with lunch near her favorite boutique in Soho. He spotted her through the window before he reached the door, laughing with a friend over iced coffee, her figure fitted into a snug dress that left nothing to hide. There was no bump. He stepped closer to the open window. "Honestly, the fake bump was getting annoying," Sora was saying, swirling the ice in her cup. "But it worked. He believes every word." Her friend laughed. "You're terrible. I'm smart. There's a difference." Jiwon was already looking for a way out of that marriage. His wife wasn't giving him what he wanted, and everyone kept whispering in his ear. "I just gave him a push." Jiwon pushed the door open. The bell above it rang sharp and sudden. "Jiwon." Sora set down her cup. "What are you doing here? You were never pregnant." His voice shook. "Was there ever a baby at all? Does it matter now?" "It matters more than anything." "You were already looking for an excuse to leave your wife," Sora said, standing without an ounce of shame. "I simply gave you one. You lied to me. You let me believe I was going to be a father. You let me destroy my marriage over a lie. Your marriage was already dead, Jiwon. You just didn't want to admit it." She crossed her arms. "Don't stand here and act like the victim. You wanted an heir so badly, you didn't even ask me a single real question. You just believed whatever made you feel like a man again. That's not fair. Neither is spending 5 years blaming a woman for something that was never her fault," Sora shot back. "I heard the way your mother talks about her. I heard the way you never once defended her. You didn't fall for me because you loved me. You fell for me because I gave you an excuse to stop feeling small." Jiwon stared at her, and something in his chest went cold and hollow. He turned and walked out without another word. He did not go home that night. He checked into a hotel and sat alone in the dark for hours. His mother found him 3 days later, unshaven, hollow-eyed, sitting in his old childhood bedroom. "Jiwon." She sat beside him. "What happened?" "She was never pregnant, She lied. All of it was a lie." His mother's hand flew to her mouth. "What?" "She faked it. For my money. For the name." His mother sat in silence for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller than he had ever heard it. "I told you nothing could be wrong with you. I told you not to listen to Grace when she asked you to get tested. I was so certain, Jiwon. I was so certain because I did not want it to be true. It doesn't matter now. It matters." Her eyes filled with tears. "Get tested. Please. I need to know." The results came back within a week. Park Jiwon was infertile. Had been for years. likely since a bout of illness in his early 20s that no one had ever connected to the years of blame that followed. It had never been Grace. He sat in the doctor's office long after the appointment ended, staring at the paper in his hands, and a memory surfaced. Grace, sitting across from him at the kitchen island years earlier, her voice gentle, her eyes hopeful. "I think we should both get tested. Not just me. Both of us." He had shut her down. He had let his mother's certainty become his own pride, had let that pride build a wall so thick the truth could not reach him for 5 years. His mother wept when he told her. 5 years, she whispered. 5 years I looked at that girl across my dinner table and blamed her. I said things to her I can never take back. She sat there and took it, every single time, and it was never her. It was my son. My own certainty did this. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. What have I done? Jaiwan found Grace's address through a mutual friend. He sat in his car outside Halden Fertility Research for nearly an hour before he found the courage to walk inside. Grace was in her office, reviewing patient files, her curls pulled back, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up when he knocked, and her expression did not shift into surprise. Some part of her had known this day would come. "Jaiwan," she said simply. "Can I come in?" She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I got tested," he said, his voice rough. "The results came back. I'm infertile, Grace. It was never you." His eyes were wet. "I am so sorry. For all of it. The blaming, the silence, letting my mother say what she said. Sora, every single day I made you carry something that was never yours to carry." Grace listened quietly. She let him say every word. When he finished, she opened a drawer and pulled out a worn envelope, its edges soft from years of handling. She set it on the desk and slid it open, placing the paper inside face up. Jaiwan looked at it, confused, until his eyes found the header. A fertility report, dated nearly 2 years before their divorce. Confirmation that Grace Brooks was, and had always been, perfectly healthy. He stared at the paper, then up at her, his mouth opening without sound. She placed his own recent report beside it, the two papers sitting side by side like two halves of a story finally complete. "I knew I wasn't the problem," Grace said softly. "I've known for almost 2 years. Then why?" His voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I loved you too much to make you feel like one." Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "You were so afraid of being broken, Jaiwan. I didn't want to be the one who broke you." He put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "For 5 years, Grace said quietly, I gave you grace." She let the words settle. "And you mistook it for guilt." Jaiwan lifted his head, tears streaming, and opened his mouth to speak. Grace only looked at him with a calm, quiet sadness, the kind that comes from having already grieved something long before the other person understood it was gone. He nodded slowly, stood, and walked to the door. He paused there, his hand on the frame. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for never making me feel small, even when you had every reason to." Grace did not respond. She watched him go, and when the door clicked shut behind him, she let out one long, slow breath. Through the glass wall of her office, a young couple stood nervously at the front desk, their hands intertwined. The woman's eyes red-rimmed with the particular exhaustion of hope that has been disappointed too many times. Grace rose from her desk, smoothed the front of her blazer, and picked up a fresh patient file. She walked out into the waiting room and offered the young couple the same warm, steady smile she had once given to strangers at her own dinner table, back when she had nothing left to give but grace. "Hi," she said gently, extending her hand. "My name is Grace. Let's see how we can help you." And she walked with them down the hallway, ready to help another family find the peace she once had to search so hard to find for herself. Thank you for watching this episode of Afro-Seoul Stories. Hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about love, loss, and the grace it takes to heal. Until next time, soulmates, keep believing that even the quietest strength can carry you all the way home.